dugsiyada Nuruddin Schools.
Hello, welcome back to our lessons. Have a Wednesday and thank you very much. I say to you, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Today our lesson is, we're going to talk about relative pronouns. Relative pronouns. Some of our students, they reviewed relative pronouns, but some classes, they missed this relative pronouns. It's page 119 or 119, page 119, form 4. So before we start our lesson, we're gonna define or specify our objectives, the objectives of the lesson. Objectives of the lesson. By the end of the lesson, students should be able to define relative pronouns. What is relative pronoun? Use the relative clauses correctly. Use the relative clauses correctly. Study how the relative pronouns introduce relative clauses. Because we're going to use relative pronouns, relative clauses. So relative pronouns. We have to define what is relative pronoun are. A relative pronoun is a pronoun used to begin a subordinate clause. Subordinate clause. A relative pronoun again is a pronoun that is used to introduce a subordinate clause or dependent clause. It can be referred as a relative pronoun since it indicates the relationship of the subordinate clause to the rest of sentence. You know, there is two clauses, dependent clauses and independent clauses. But relative pronouns, they always introduce dependent clauses or subordinate clauses. Dependent clause and subordinate clauses, they are same. Okay, relative clauses are adjective clauses. So, relative pronouns introduce relative clauses. Relative pronouns introduce relative clauses. There are two clauses, dependent clause and independent clause. On the other hand, dependent clause, independent clause, and subordinate clause. So, relative pronouns are type of dependent clauses. Two clauses. For example, the man who killed the boy was arrested. So the man who was arrested, who killed the boy was arrested. So there is two clauses in this sentence, and the sentence that contains two clauses is called complex sentence. So when a sentence contains subordinate clause, it is a complex sentence. There are different types of sentences like simple sentence, compound sentence, complex sentence, and compound complex sentence. But the sentence that contains two clauses, we call it a complex sentence. So relative clauses cannot stand. Relative clause cannot stand alone as a sentence. But independent clause can stand alone. A relative clause will have subject and a verb. A relative clause will have subject and a verb, but it simply does not make sense without the main clause. You know, if you don't have a main clause, the subordinate clause or the dependent clause cannot stand alone. It doesn't make a sense. So we have to have a main clause, independent clause. Main clause, it means independent clause. For example, the house that Jack built is large. The house, for example, the house that Jack built is large. So here two clauses. The house is large, and that Jack built. So we have two clauses. That check built is relative clause because we have the word that, and the house is large, and the house is independent clause. So if I say to you, the house is large, is independent clause, and it can stand alone, so it makes sense. But that check built, it doesn't make sense. So we have two clauses. The house, that check built is dependent clause. The main clause is the house is large is a main clause. The house is large is a main clause or independent clause. But the dependent clause, relative clause, that check built. That check built. So this sentence has two clauses. Relative clauses and independent clause or main clause. Dependent clause and independent clause. The professor whom I respect. The professor whom I respect recently. This is whom I respect is dependent clause or relative clause because we start the word whom. Received an award. So received an award is main clause or the independent clause. So the main clause, the professor recently received an award. This is main clause, but the relative clause could be whom I respect. Whom I respect. So it doesn't make sense. If I say to you whom I respect, this is a relative clause. It took me a while to tolerate people. It took me a while to tolerate people who eat popcorn during the movie. So here we have two clauses, relative clause and independent clause or main clause, relative clause or main clause. So it took me a while to tolerate people, that is a main clause, but who eats popcorn during movie is dependent clause. So I have two clauses. The library did not have the book that I wanted. The library didn't have the book is a main clause or dependent clause. But that I wanted is dependent clause or relative clause. So that is standing for the library. So if you have the library, this noun and this is a relative pronoun, what we are talking about, because that, who, whom, which and whose are relative pronouns. They introduce relative clauses. So that is standing for the library. This noun. When do we use whom as a relative pronoun? When do we use whom as a pronoun? As a relative pronoun, whom. The word whom, we're going to use, let me explain. The word whom can be used only for people, not animals, not things, not concepts, not ideas, but only people. And it's as objective case. It can be used as objective case. We use whom when the relative clause is used in the objective case. This is the case. The man whom I helped is your friend. The man whom I helped. The person I help. I is the subject, and the man is the object. So whom is stands for the man. So the women, for example, the woman to whom you have spoken is my teacher. How many clauses in here? Two clauses. The woman to whom you have spoken to. The woman, not the subject of the sentence, but it is the object of the sentence. Where is the subject of the sentence? You is the subject of the sentence. It's my teacher, and teacher is complement. So the women and whom is standing for or represents women. So since women is the object of sentence or objective case, you is the subject. So I say to the women whom you have spoken is my teacher. So we have two clauses in here. The woman is my teacher is the main clause. Main clause is the main clause. But whom you spoken to is the dependent clause to whom you spoken. So here you have two clauses. Main clause, in other words, independent clause, and dependent clause, in other words, relative clause. So these dependent clause and relative clauses, they are similar. We're going to use similar. And main clause and independent clause. So you have two clauses in here. So whenever you see this whom, it's a relative pronoun, so it introduces the relative clause. Whom is the object of the preposition to. So the word whom is object. Who is subject and whom is object. The visitor for whom you were waiting has arrived. How many clauses? The visitor for whom you were waiting has arrived. Here we have two clauses. Two clauses. A main clause and dependent clause. So the visitor has arrived. If I say the visitor has arrived, this sentence can stand alone. But if I say to you for whom you were waiting, doesn't stand alone. So we're going to say this one, this is relative clause. And the word whom is a relative pronoun. But the visitor has arrived is independent clause or main clause. So we have two clauses. And originally this sentence is complex sentence, not simple sentence, not compound sentence, not compound complex sentence, but if it is complex sentence. Because if the sentence contains two clauses, we call complex sentence. Okay, relative pronouns can be used as a possessive case in some clauses. Relative pronouns can be used as a possessive in some clauses. The word whose we're going to use as a possessive. For example, whose is the only possessive relative pronoun we have in relative pronouns. The antecedent of whose can be both people and things. The woman whose shop, don't say her, but whose shop was robbed is crying or is weeping. So whose always shows us position or ownership of the person or the things. The family, for example, look here. The family is a noun. Whose house, who belongs to this house, who belongs to this house. Whose shows us that house belongs to the family. So it can be replaced or changed into her or his or like a possessive adjective. So the family whose house burnt in the fire was immediately given a complimentary suite at a hotel. So this house was burnt in the fire. We're going to say it is relative clause or dependent clause because it introduced the word whose. But the family was immediately given a complimentary suite. Look here, it can stand alone. If I say the family was immediately given a complimentary suite at a hotel, it can stand alone. But whose house was burnt in the fire, it cannot stand alone. So we say this is whose house burnt in the fire, it is relative clause because it introduced the word whose. But the family was immediately given its independent clause or main clause. So the book, look here, the book whose author won a Pulitzer Prize has become a bestseller. How many clauses in this sentence? And how many relative pronouns? Two clauses. The book whose author won a Pulitzer Prize. Whose author won a Pulitzer Prize is a relative clause. You can remember whose has become a bestseller. It's a main clause. So we have two clauses. Remember the word whose, whom, which, that, and whom always introduce relative pronouns, relative clauses or dependent clauses. Notice that there are no commas, no comma, you know comma? That set of the clauses above. There is no comma in here, so we cannot use comma. But another case, that is because these are restrictive clauses. You know, there is two clauses, restrictive clauses and non-restrictive clauses. The word restrictive, it means limited. So if you have restrictive clause, you don't need comma. But if you have restrictive clause, you need comma. And are necessary the full understanding of the sentence. Restrictive clause, no comma needed. So restrictive clause, you don't need comma. We're going to use that. Some relative clauses are set off by comma. Some relative clauses are set off by comma. Commas. Okay, relative pronouns that introduce clauses that are non-restrictive clauses provide non-essential information. So non-essential information, if you have non-restrictive clause, that means you have a non-essential information about the antecedent in the main clause. For example, we're going to use the word which. It's the relative pronoun that begins with non-restrictive clause. So if someone, what is the difference between that? Some people, they always confuse that and which. But that cannot be, it can be used with restrictive clause, and which can be used with non-restrictive clause. The theater, comma, in which the play debuted, comma, and comma. Okay, which is the relative pronoun that begins with non-restrictive clause. Non-restrictive clause. Often, the theater in which the play debuted housed 300 people. So the theater in which the play debuted housed 300 people. We cannot use that there. You have two commas. This one and this one. It separates the two clauses, main clause and dependent clause. So in which the play debuted, since you have two commas, we're going to use which, because which is the relative pronoun that always begins with non-restrictive clause. So in your examination is, if I put here slash or dash, and I say to you which is corrected, that and which, and you have two commas, always use which, because you have non-restrictive clause. The sculptor which he admired. I have two commas here and here. The sculpture which he admired. Which he admired is which clause? Relative clause or dependent clause. Was moved into the basement of the museum. So since you have two clauses, two commas, we're going to use which, but do not use that, because it's not necessary. And I say to you often, which is the relative pronoun that begins with non-restrictive clause, that there is information that's not needed. If you remove this clause, the meaning of the main clause does not change. It does not change if you remove this one. Okay. And the information that clause provides is not necessary. So non-essential commas is needed. Non-essential information, commas is needed. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. That is the end of our lesson. Let us meet another time, inshallah. I say to you, always practice and read.